All right. Well, welcome everybody to the next in our educational series that we have going on here in November and December. So for those of you who are joining us again, you've seen some of our previous shows, give us a thumbs up or let us know that you're joining us again. You're a regular. And for those of you who are joining us new, let us know where you're joining us from. Are you a health coach? Are you a practitioner? Are you looking to become a coach? We'd love to kind of learn who we have with us before we get started. So I am in Saskatchewan, Canada, just outside of Regina, and it is gloomy and rainy. It's a typical November day. Elizabeth, how is it for you?
I am in Charlotte, North Carolina. It is also gloomy and rainy.
One of those gloomy days. There we
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. UK, we got somebody from the UK. Awesome. Second time from Charlotte. Fantastic.
Nice, my Charlotte sister.
Nice, fantastic. Alberta, good to see you, fellow Canadian. Got some familiar names here, which is great. Awesome. We've got some FDN grads in here that I can see. Welcome, FDN grads. Always good to see you guys. Fantastic.
Beautiful, sunny New Mexico. I'm super jealous.
New Jersey, more from the UK. Nice. Another fellow Canadian, Canadian Rockies. You guys are hitting it out of the park. That's awesome. Wisconsin. Great. That's fantastic. Well,
Hey, Danielle.
well, today we are going to be going over a case study. So if you've been joining us all along, we've kind of been going over a few things. You got to hear from Reed and Elizabeth early on, all about the concepts of metabolic chaos and how FDNs look at things differently. We did do, Elizabeth and I were with you guys last week, where we talked about our Dress for Health Success protocol and basically what DRESS stands for, and how we create lifestyle recommendations for clients. You would have also joined Evan and I last week. We did a course tour where we gave you a behind the scenes look at what the course looks like behind the scenes and what you get and what kind of support you get. And I think we talked intake forms earlier this week, right, Elizabeth, with you?
We sure did. We sure did. In which we again went over some metabolic chaos and what it means, and then why we do intake the way that we do.
Fantastic. Awesome. So what we're going to do today is we're actually going to kind of pull a lot of this together for you, and we're going to present a case study. And this is your opportunity for to be able to see how we look at a particular client, look at their main complaints, take a look at how they're presenting in terms of labs, and then how we review it and the types of recommendations we give them. So kind of pulling it all together. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Elizabeth, to start presenting on that. And as always, we're going to have time for questions. So please make sure you put those in the chat. Brenda, our amazing colleague, is here. She can help answer questions as well. And let's dig into this client.
Fantastic. So our client today is Christy. She is 25 years old. She is a teacher. She has a diagnosis of Hashimoto's, and interestingly, she was a preemie. She was born at 29 weeks. So we're going to check in on Christy. Her main health complaint is that she's having trouble getting pregnant, and so we are going to look into all of her metabolic chaos and see what we can do there. So we're going to take a look at her metabolic chaos scorecard. But before we do that, just really quick, we're going to have a reminder of what metabolic chaos is in case this is your first time joining us. This might not be a phrase that you know. And if you've joined us many times, you know it's so interesting. We should be talking about it all the time because it is a little bit of a paradigm shift. And it can be hard to wrap our heads around exactly what metabolic chaos means. So metabolic chaos is the idea that a symptom is the very last thing to happen, and that a symptom cannot point us to what it is that is actually wrong, because symptoms are vague, and the same symptom can be true of multiple root causes. So as FDNs, we do not chase the root cause. We do not say, oh my God, we have to figure it out. And I want you to look at this physiological aspects of metabolic chaos chart while I sort of explain why it is that we don't look at root cause, why it is instead that we look at all the imbalances that the root cause has perpetrated in the body. And that is really where we start. So we've got our circles here on the outside that represent our foundational body system. So our hormones, immune, digestion, detoxification, energy production, nervous system, and oxidative stress. This is what we measure in everyone, no matter what the symptoms are, no matter what the health complaints are, no matter what the diagnoses are. And we're not tracking down the so-called root cause because I want you to imagine that these circles are like orchestra members and that they're all playing a different instrument. So let's say our hormone guy over here is the trumpet player. And all of a sudden, he slows down. He just decides like, I need to slow down. Now, this is going to throw everybody next to hormones off. And immune might decide, I need to slow down because now this is the tempo we're playing. Oxidative stress may decide, I need to speed up in order to catch up because everybody else is behind. And then across the orchestra, detoxification was keeping time on hormones. So now detoxification's all thrown off. Digestion's all thrown off. Energy production doesn't know what to do. And everybody has a different strategy now about how to get back in balance. So everybody's just off on their own, either slowing down, speeding up, or somewhere in between. So if we know that the root cause is this trumpet player over here is hormones, can I, at this point, go to hormones and say, you're the cause of all this, so let me just fix you and everything's going to be fine? Will that work? Put in the chat what you think. That absolutely will not work, right? Mm-hmm. That will not work because there is this downward spiral of imbalance now and a prevailing environment of dysfunction that has come from this original root cause. So hormones might still be misbehaving in this picture, or they might have already righted themselves. And so by the time I look at the picture, hormones might not even be showing up as a root cause. But this is why it doesn't matter, is because now everybody is thrown off. And so even if I go back and fix hormones, it's not going to fix the picture. Hormones will snap back to being in dysfunction because nobody else knows what they're supposed to be doing at this point. So this is why we take a picture of all the functions that are listed on this chart through our lab work, is so we can see basically who's thrown off and by how much. And that is what we concentrate on, is who is thrown off and by how much, rather than what is the root cause. And that is what separates us from most other practitioners out there. And that is how metabolic chaos, it becomes the guiding principle that we work around. It's like, it doesn't matter how it happened. It only matters who is thrown off and by how much. And now we can fix that, and that will right the ship. So I'm going to now pull up Christy's metabolic chaos scorecard so we can check out what is going on with her. Maybe that's what I'm going to do. No, it's definitely what I'm going to do. Okay, so we've got her metabolic chaos scorecard here. Sorry, every time I start sharing.
This is in real time, everybody. We're just, flipping between screens. This is how it works when you're a practitioner. You're looking at all the information.
Yeah, if you got to flip between screens, it's yeah. Okay, so no matter, I feel like every time I get on Zoom, like my whole computer just slows down. And then every time I'm trying to like switch quickly between things, it's like, not while you're on Zoom.
Could you, and just because I'm seeing it a little bit smaller, are you able to make it just a little bit bigger, just so that people can see it? Yeah. I know you're going to explain the concepts, but
yeah. And please always tell me that, because for me, it's like
perfect,
taking up my entire second monitor and it looks big to me. So always tell me when you can't see it.
It looks great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we've got Christy here, and her main complaints are infertility, fatigue, anxiety, and blood sugar swings. I did ask Christy like how she knew that her blood sugar was swinging. Like, was she wearing a continuous glucose monitor? And she said, no, it was just more of a feeling of like spiking and crashing, and having that crash kind of come 45 minutes after a meal, and then feeling hungry again, and like not quite like the blood sugar is just not getting her through the day. Okay, so on our metabolic chaos scorecard, she's able to quantify on a scale of 5 how badly these main complaints are showing up for her. So infertility is a 5, fatigue is a 3, anxiety is a 3, blood sugar swings are a 4. So then, as we're looking down into her metabolic chaos scorecard, we see that in the past, she rates her total score at 123, which isn't great, but it's not terrible. And now she's at 241. So whatever it is that she's doing for herself, and we will see what she's doing for herself when we look at her lifestyle and medical history form, it's not working. So we know that she's getting worse. So whatever intervention she's doing for herself, they are not having a net positive effect. And as we look down further into how her metabolic chaos breaks down by system, and again, this is based on reporting of symptoms, and symptoms are vague. And so I don't know for certain that everything that's showing up in the hormone category is because of hormones, and that everything that she marked in the immune category is because of immune. There can be crossover, but this just sort of gives us an idea of where major dysfunction is lying for her on this self-assessment. So for her hormones, in the past, they were at a 38. Now they're at a 73. That's a major piece of 241. The immune system was at 22. Now it's at 28. Not a huge jump, but still not getting better. Definitely getting worse. Digestion used to be at 14. Now it's at 31. So it's more than doubled. Detoxification used to be at 11. Now it's at 24. It has also doubled. Energy production was at a 15, now it's at a 36. Nervous system was at a 14, now it's at a 30. Oxidative stress was at a 9, and now it's at a 19. So that's sort of how everything's breaking down. Now, her main complaints are the problems that we've been hired to solve: infertility, fatigue, anxiety, blood sugar swings. But everything else on the metabolic chaos scorecard is going to be these secondary and tertiary complaints that give me a deeper look into her experience, into what's actually happening for her on a daily basis, how bad it is, what is involved. And it's going to give me a lot of additional and deeper clinical correlation when I'm looking at the main complaints and the secondary and tertiary complaints in relationship to her lab markers. So what we're doing with this intake, as I expressed earlier in the week, was it this week? Yes, it was this week. What I was expressing earlier this week is that if we think about Christy, she is on one side of the river, and over there on her side of the river, she's got everything that's ever happened to her in her life, her current diagnoses, her lifestyle, and how she feels in all of her main complaints. And on the other side of the river, we have her lab data. And it is up to me as the FDN practitioner to create a bridge between those two things. And that bridge is called clinical correlation. So we're really going to see how that works today. Very exciting. But we will have her redo this metabolic chaos scorecard every 30 days that we're working with her, so we can see how things are moving or not moving. If they are moving in the wrong direction, if they're moving in the right direction, if they're not budging. And that can be macro in terms of what is her total metabolic chaos score doing. It can be micro in terms of what is each system doing inside of what the total score is doing. And it can be micro in terms of what is each symptom within each system doing as we move along throughout the process. So that is what we're looking at.
And I love having clients do that, because oftentimes when we're working with somebody, they forget how they feel. And so as they start working with you, they start to feel better. And then they're like, that becomes the new normal. And then they say, I don't think this is working. And then when they redo it, they realize, oh, I forgot I was having headaches every day. I forgot I was having all these things. So it's a really great tool to keep them motivated when clients feel like they're not moving forward. So I love that tool.
Yep, that's a really great point, Brandy. And what we talked about during the intake seminar earlier this week was we as humans move our baseline very quickly. That's part of why we're so adaptable and how we have become the sentient topmost creature on the planet, is that we are very adaptable and our baseline moves really easily. And just a really quick example of this, if you're like, what does that really mean? Is when you're going on vacation, within the space of a plane ride, you recalibrate to like, the people in my life, the only ones that matter are the ones that are here with me or the ones that I'm going to meet. Everybody else, I'm not even thinking about them right now. They might as well not be in my life. The things that I own have now been confined to what is in this suitcase or what I can buy where I'm going. So my house doesn't matter. My car doesn't matter. Like all the possessions that I left behind, I'm not even thinking about them. And that happens within the space of a plane ride, right? So we are eminently adaptable creatures. Okay. So we're just going to take a quick peek at her lifestyle and medical history form here. If Zoom is going to let me do that.
No problem. We're
Yes,
getting some good
it is.
questions. We're getting some good questions for later. You guys are so smart. Love these questions.
Oh, that's awesome. Love that. Okay. I'm going to make this bigger. And then I'm going to make it bigger.
That actually looks pretty good. Oh, where you had it before looked pretty good.
Yeah, well, I'm going to have to do it this way. Okay, awesome.
Awesome. Yep.
Okay, so Christy is 25 years old. She is 5'5", weighs 160 pounds, and is married. She is currently taking on the medication side levothyroxine in conjunction with her Hashimoto's diagnosis. And on the supplement side, she's taking a multi, she's taking some Bs, she's taking some CoQ10, some vitamin D3, some maca, some magnesium, the pretty usual suspects. Like she's sort of tinkering around with self-medicating and saying like, how can I have more energy and less brain fog and sleep better at night? I'll just pull out the usual suspects. So for her current medical diagnoses, she has Hashimoto's and was born premature at 39 weeks. This is her self-assessment of her current lifestyle. So she looked at herself for diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, and supplementation. She follows a pretty standard American diet, or what we call SAD. She's eating a lot of processed foods. She's drinking tap water. She's drinking a lot of coffee. She's eating dairy, processed sugar. She's drinking alcohol, soda, all that sort of stuff. She's not sleeping enough. She's not putting enough effort towards rest. With exercise, she's sitting down a lot at her job. She's not doing a whole lot of exercise. And when she does exercise, she's doing cardio, which may or may not be agreeing with her body, depending on who she is. For her physical stressors, she's got a couple of those listed: caffeine abuse, repetitive motion at the job, no downtime during the day. Emotional stressors, all the big hitters are there, as they are for most people. Environmental stressors, she's got some of those that she's working with as well. And with supplements, they're in her routine, but she's not taking good quality supplements. So a lot of work to do there within lifestyle. With her general medical history, she's had her tonsils out. She has not had any other serious illnesses or surgeries. She is taking prescription medication. She does have an allergy to mangoes, and she has seasonal allergies. She was in a serious car accident. She gives that a 2. So semi-serious car accident. We don't know how long ago that was. And when she was a kid, she participated in gymnastics, never been diagnosed with cancer, has had some dental issues going on. She's had some crowns and some root canals and some fillings, a little bit of gingivitis. And she does not have a diagnosed infertility disorder from a doctor, but she is having trouble getting pregnant. So that is our lifestyle medical history form. So I want to pause for a moment and ask, who's ready to look at some labs?
Give us some like yeses in the chat. Yes, we got some yeses. Awesome.
Awesome. Let's do it. Okay. Amazing. So the first lab that we're going to look at is called our stress and hormone panel. We're first of all going to look at a 4-point cortisol, then we're going to look at some sex hormones. I'm going to show you this lab in a very specific FDN way of looking at this lab. It is called our test comparison worksheet, and it puts the lab in the context of our preferred lab ranges rather than what the lab thinks is an ideal lab range. So hold on, let me make it bigger. I will make it bigger.
And while you're working on that, the reason that the different ranges are important is because when we look at things, we are looking at them in what range do people feel they're best? Whereas the lab range tends to be quite wide. FDN optimal ranges are where have we seen that when people fall within these ranges, they have the least amount of symptoms and they feel really good. And that's why those ranges are different.
Yep, that's a great point, Brandy. Lab ranges are made to be wide and nondescript on purpose, because if you fall off on either side of that, it's very easy to see catastrophe. It's very easy to see crisis. It's very easy to make a diagnosis from there. But when we're sort of looking at the subclinical space, we don't want us to look at this wide nondescript range. We want a much tighter range that we think better articulates good health and compare our clients to that, rather than trying to see where they fall off in terms of catastrophe. So the way that this sheet is color coded is that red means high outside of the FDN preferred range, green means inside of the FDN preferred range, and blue means low outside of the FDN preferred range. The first thing we're going to look at is cortisol. Cortisol is our primary stress hormone. It is what gets us through the day and allows us to deal with these external stressors that come at us from the time that we wake up to the time that we go to bed. Its primary function is to raise blood sugar. Because imagine if you are sitting at your desk and you get a phone call from your boss and he says, I need this thing in an hour. You don't have time to go pick out some food, cook it, eat it, digest it, and create energy. And now you can go and work on this project. You need energy right now. And this is what I call energy on credit. This is cortisol's job, is to give you some energy on credit. So it's going to take something in your body and liquefy it real quick. So cartilage or muscle or tissue, something that it can get its hands on easily and break down in order to produce blood sugar right now, outside and independent of your consumption of food. And so at the end of the day, we're all in a little bit of debt because cortisol has broken down our tissues and our cartilage and like, things we need, right? So we go to sleep, we repair with our anabolic hormones, and then we wake up and hopefully we're in a neutral state. Like we are not in debt. We have paid back the credit card debt that cortisol accrued. So we want to look at Christy's ability to make cortisol, because we do want to be able to see that the adrenals are functioning, that there is enough cortisol, but that there's not so much that we are in crazy breakdown state. So her morning cortisol, this should be your highest cortisol of the day because you've been fasting since the last time that you ate, since maybe 10, 12, 14, 16 hours by the time you wake up in the morning. Who knows, depending on your eating window. So cortisol should be highest in the morning because it is replacing blood sugar that isn't there because you haven't been eating. And then cortisol drops throughout the day because the body assumes that you will be replacing that cortisol with food, that you will be eating, and that it doesn't need to produce as much blood sugar because food will be present. Okay, so for her morning, she's at a 1.9. This is low for us. So we would prefer to see that between a 2.7 and a 4.5. So this explains the fatigue, the brain fog, the hard time getting up in the morning. It's feeling really groggy, hard to kind of get it in gear and get going because there just isn't enough pickup there. And so we definitely see that in her numbers. Then at noon, she drops down to a 1, which it's good that we're seeing a drop between morning and noon. And so she's dropping down into a range that is green for us. So we want to see this between a 0.8 and a 1.3, and she's at a 1. So on the lower side of our green range, but there in the green range. And then in the afternoon, she drops way, way down to 0.2. And so now she's back in the blue. We would like to see this really no lower than a 0.6, and she's at a 0.2. And it's a huge drop from what happened at noon. So at noon, she was in range. Now she's like way below range in the space of a few hours. So probably she feels like afternoon is her worst time, where there's no energy for her at all, where she probably wants to go take a nap, where she just can't think or get anything done. And I think a lot of us can relate to this afternoon feeling where we're like, I need a cup of coffee or I need a candy bar or like something to keep going because I've just hit a wall. These results sort of show Christy why she hits that wall in the afternoon. And then at night, she actually bounces up to 0.5. So this is within range for nighttime, but it is higher than her afternoon, and we would not expect to see that. This is what we call a relative elevation, where we should see that cortisol is constantly lower than it was the reading previous. That is what we would expect to see in a healthy circadian pattern. But for her, it bounces up. And even though it is in range, it's higher than it was in the afternoon. And so she feels like she gets the second wind at night. And then she's like, oh, I don't even want to go to bed. Like I'm not tired. And then this leads straight into insomnia and disrupted sleep and not enough sleep and all the things that contribute to this cycle that she is in of brain fog, fatigue, and then not having the vital reserve to carry a pregnancy successfully. So then we look at her cortisol sum, which for her is 3.6. We call this exhaustive phase, which for us is anything below 4.2. So she's not crazy down low in exhaustive phase, but she's a little bit in exhaustive phase. And so if we think about the body's vital reserve bank account, this report of being in exhaustive phase is telling us that this bank account is chronically low on money, that we do not put back what we are spending, that we're racking up huge credit card debt with cortisol and with other stressors, just spending money right and left and not making enough to get that bank account back in the black. So we're in debt. And that is what exhaustive phase is telling us. I'm just going to show you one chart really quick so that we can really visualize what I'm talking about here. And then we'll come back to these results. So I'm going to show you a chart that is called the phases of cortisol dysregulation. Let me make it a little bit bigger here. There we go. Okay. So all of us start out in this green box called homeostasis. This is where we are born. And homeostasis means that we're resting and relaxing, everything is in balance, it's all good. And then, as human beings do, we encounter a huge stressor. This is normal. And our bodies are adaptable enough that they can mount a big response to this stressor. And so we produce a bunch of cortisol and adrenaline, and we rise up into this acute distress box where we are meeting this stressor. And then we either live or we don't live through the stressor. So if we live, the stressor resolves, and then we go back down into homeostasis where we can repair from the catabolic damage that was done by all of this cortisol and adrenaline. And then we're ready for the next stressor. But enter modern life where the stressors are never ending, where we are in what is called chronic stress. And so this is where we start really living outside of our evolutionary design, where we are carrying too much stress for too long, way past what our bodies are meant to hold. And so we go up into this acute distress box and we never leave. We never come back down. We just kind of hang out here and we never make it back to homeostasis because we just have stressor after stressor after stressor after stressor after stressor after stressor from the time that we get up to the time that we go to bed. And even when we go to bed, we lay down and we think about all the stressors. So we're still stressed. We are still in a stress response. So that stress just never goes away. And so while we are on the left side of this curve, we are enjoying, and cortisol is going up, we are enjoying some of the benefits of cortisol, this amazing supply of blood sugar. It is an anti-inflammatory. It is a painkiller, because if you could feel it breaking you down, you wouldn't be able to function, right? So it's got sort of this nice pain-killing quality to it. And I think all of us can remember a time in our lives when we had endless focus, when we didn't have to sleep that much, when we were throwing 16 plates up in the air at one time and it was fine. We were burning the candle at 15 ends and we didn't feel it. We could drink, we could get up, we could go on our way. It didn't matter what we did to ourselves. We were amazingly resilient. That is that left side of the curve that you all are remembering, my friends. And then we get to, so tell me if you remember that time in your life. I remember that time in my life. I was in this was probably my whole 20s. I was a night owl. I didn't sleep. I was involved in theater. I was always up and out. I was incredibly stressed because that lifestyle is very, very stressful. There was a lot going on in my life. And yet I was like, had endless focus. I could sit in a 16-hour tech rehearsal like it was nothing. It was amazing. And I always thought that that would be there, right? We get used to thinking that this is normal because our baseline shifts really easily, as we talked about. So then you hit the peak of this where you just can't do this any longer, because on the other side, you've been writing these enormous cortisol checks and you had a secret savings account that was covering the debt. So it was coming over and making sure that you were never overdrawn. That was your vital reserve, but now you spent it all. There is no more vital reserve. So there's no way to maintain this level anymore. And so the body stops being able to make cortisol at that level. That cortisol starts dropping. And now we're on the right side of this curve, where once we get to this yellow or this orange box, we are in what's called compensatory. The body is now compensating for what it can no longer do normally. And so you're used to having cortisol, it's a lot higher. So even though you've sort of dropped back down now to a more normal level of cortisol, to you it feels kind of tragic because it used to be much higher. And you're self-medicating at this stage where you're making sure you got some coffee in the afternoon, or wine to go to sleep with, or sugar, or whatever it is, that ibuprofen at 10 o'clock every morning when the stress headache hits. So these types of self-medicating things that we do. And then if we continue with all of these stressors in our lives, we're eventually going to fall down in this exhaustive phase where our friend Christy finds herself. And Christy's body no longer has the energy to run her systems at 100% and deal with her external stressors. And in this situation, the external stressors always win. So exhaustive phase is a little bit like when your cell phone battery gets low and you put it on low power mode, and your screen will still light up, but only at 30% and not for very long. Now that is your hormones. Now that is your immune system. Now that is your detoxification system. Now that is your digestion on at 30% and not for very long. So this is where Christy finds herself in the exhaustive phase, which tells us a lot about why she might be having difficulty getting pregnant just already, because she's on low power mode. She doesn't have a lot of money in the bank. So let's go back to her results now.
Everybody was loving your explanation. They were all kind of saying, yeah, 18 to 22 was awesome.
Wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you're not wrong. You are not wrong. I certainly remember that time with fondness. All right, so where is that? There it is. Great. Okay. So coming back to her results here, we have a couple of different ways to evaluate this cortisol pattern. So out of 100% of cortisol that she made that day, we would like to see 64% of it in the morning. For her, it was 52.8. So she's kind of operating at an 11.5% deficit in the morning. So this explains why she's tired, fatigued, hard for her to get up, hard for her to get going. And then at noon, that should be 18.8% of her day. And for her, it's 27.8. So now she's at a 9% overage. So we've gone from 12% under to 9% over in this stretch. So when she talks about anxiety, this is part of the reason why. It's like exhaustion, and then you're like, boom, okay, I'm hyper aware of what's going on. And then in the afternoon, that should be 14.3% of her day. And for her, it's 5.6. So now we go from a 9% overage back down to a 9% underperformance. So she's just on a roller coaster pattern, this poor girl. So like, no wonder she's not feeling her best. And then at nighttime, that should be 8.9% of her day. And for her, it's 13.9%. So she's operating at a 5% overage there. So we went from 12% under to 9% over to 9% under to now 5% over. And now we're trying to go to bed. So this shows us a lot about what's going on with how Christy feels throughout the day. And this is why we like a 4-point cortisol rather than a cumulative cortisol, because we'd like to be able to see what the pattern is. So on a graph, this green line is the very best 4-point cortisol pattern that we could have imaginable. And this blue line is our friend Christy. So obviously there are some healing opportunities there with the way that her HPA axis is encouraging her adrenals to participate throughout the day. So now we get into some sex hormones. Her DHEA is that anabolic answer to the catabolic nature of cortisol. DHEA is what comes in to repair all of that that cortisol has broken down during the day. And so we see that she's at a 1, she's low, where our range starts at 1.7 for a female. So already her anabolic potential is suppressed. Before any other stressors happen, before anything else gets in the way, her anabolic potential is suppressed. So she's breaking down faster than she's building back up. And that is borne out by this cortisol to DHEA ratio here. She's at a 3.6. Anything above a 3.2 is considered in a catabolic state. So cortisol dominant, more cortisol than DHEA, and the body is breaking down faster than it is building up. So then we take a look at her actual sex hormones. Her estradiol is low at 2.4, where we don't really want to see that lower than a 4.8 for somebody her age and in her stage of menstruation. Her progesterone is low at a 64. We don't really want to see that lower than 215. So it's very, very low. And of course, this is going to put her in estrogen dominance. So let's just take these three together here. So estradiol is that is another anabolic hormone. And it's very, very important for pregnancy and for the menstrual cycle and such. So when it's low, she's going to feel depressed. She's going to feel like maybe there's some weight gain going on. She's going to feel brain fogged, like all of those things. Progesterone is her rest and relax hormone. So this is what sort of invites in the parasympathetic. And so the fact that it is low means that she's going to feel anxious. She's going to feel like, kind of too wired. So she might have this like tired but wired thing going on. And then progesterone is also what keeps in check the more destructive characteristics of estrogen, to make sure that estrogen is doing what it should do and not more than what it should do. But she doesn't have enough progesterone for that. So she's in estrogen dominance, which is now going to give her all of the symptoms of estrogen excess alongside the symptoms of estrogen deficiency, which can really make a person feel crazy. So the estrogen excess is going to be anxiety, irritability, all of those types of things, along with weight gain. So on the one hand, she's going to feel depressed and low, and on the other hand, she's going to feel irritable and anxious, which is absolutely borne out on her metabolic chaos scorecard. And then her testosterone is also a bit low. So we'd like to see that for someone her age around 27. She's at a 20. And testosterone is that sort of hormone that does help us keep muscle mass, does help us stay kind of fit and in shape that way. But it's also our hormone that's like, I'm going to get out and crush it. Like, I'm going to get out and just dominate today. And when we don't have testosterone in the appropriate amount, we tend to feel like, maybe not today. I don't really feel like it today. I don't really want to go out and crush it. That doesn't interest me. So apathy, depression, all these types of things. And I think a lot of people are running around like feeling depressed, feeling anxious, thinking maybe I need therapy, or maybe I need to, get on an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication, or like, what's wrong with me that I can't get my butt in gear and like do the things that I know I should do. Well, it's right here in the hormones, right? It's not necessarily something wrong with brain chemistry or any type of actual mental malady. It could just be this deficit of hormones. Hormones make us feel good. Hormones make us feel alive. Hormones make us feel excited and energetic. Hormones help us feel joy and help us be on message and on purpose and intentional with our lives. And when they're not there, that is a sign that the body is like, look, I can't worry about reproduction right now because I'm worried about all of these external threats. So once these external threats calm down, then I can fully fund the sex hormone bank account so that we can think about getting pregnant and reproducing. But her body is in a state of fight flight right now where it can't really relax. It doesn't feel safe. And it's like, look, there's no point in me spending a bunch of money for a lot of robust, sexy, juicy hormones. Maybe later. So this is a very, very big healing opportunity for her in terms of her fertility journey. And then the last two markers on this test are immune markers. So we are looking at the secretory IgA, which is like, I think of Sig-A as being sort of the bouncer at the bar door, at these places where the inside of your body meets the outside world, like your eyeballs and your mouth, your nasal passages, your small intestines, your genital tracts. These types of things are sort of open to the outside world. And so you need a bouncer at the door to be like, you're good. You can come on in. You're going to obey the rules and be a good customer. And you are going to be rowdy and destroy property. And we don't want you here. So it's really important that our bar bouncer be well resourced. And what we see here is that her immune system doesn't have enough money to be on full patrol. So she's really flagging here with an immune system that's saying like, look, I just don't have enough money. My bouncer is in the next room asleep. So anybody is able to walk into the bar. And then her melatonin, which is a sleep hormone, is taken at noon. Melatonin also has its own rhythm. It really shouldn't be there in great quantities at noon because that would affect function. For her, it's at a 4.5. Our range is up to 5, but she's getting to the top of that range where melatonin is an antioxidant and an immune booster. And so her immune system is kind of saying, hey, I need some help bringing in that melatonin. And it's sort of right on the borderline of where melatonin is going to be adding to this problem of keeping her tired and brain fogged and fatigued during the day because it is a sleep hormone. So those are her SHP results.
Awesome. And I've been answering a lot of questions in the chat. You guys have some great questions. So to reiterate for some of you who've been asking, all of those markers that Elizabeth just went over are all on the salivary stress and hormones profile that we teach you in FDN. And there was somebody who did ask, we do have alternatives in Europe, Australia, New Zealand. So we have salivary alternatives with those same markers, regardless of where you are in the world.
Awesome. Okay, so now we are moving on to a test called the Metabolic Wellness Profile. So is that big enough? Can everybody see that?
I mean, it looks good to me. I think that's okay. I can definitely see what the markers are and the numbers. I think that works.
Great. Okay.
Awesome.
So the Metabolic Wellness Profile is, in essence, 3 organic acid markers. And they are intentionally selected to give us a look at digestion, detoxification, and oxidative stress. So our first marker, indican, is a measure of protein digestion. So indican is a byproduct of protein that is rotting in the gut or putrefying. It really shouldn't be there. It is not a byproduct of normal function. So when we see that her indican is super, super high like this, it's off the chart high. Like the test stops measuring at 167 and she's over 167. So she could be 168 or she could be 3 million. Like we don't know, but we know that her indican is really high, meaning that she's not digesting protein well. So even if she is eating the best diet in the world with the cleanest meat, which she's not, which we know from her lifestyle medical history form. But even if she were, it would not be giving her benefit because her digestion is really compromised in this way. And because protein is rotting in the gut, that is inviting an unhealthy bacterial balance in her gut, which is called dysbiosis. And so for us, indican is definitely a provocateur of metabolic chaos, but is both the cause of dysbiosis and the effect of dysbiosis. So it becomes this sort of vicious circle with indican. And although we don't have on this test measures of carb or fat digestion, we can extrapolate that if one of those functions is compromised, it is likely that the others are also compromised. So then we look at total bile acids. And this is a measure of when your liver makes bile and bile goes up to the gallbladder and is stored there. And then when you eat, the gallbladder kind of squeezes out everything that was in the reservoir to go and help digest the fat as it comes into the small intestine. And during that process, it also gets digested, and then the bile acids are returned to the liver to be recycled and made into bile again. And that is called enterohepatic circulation. So what this is telling us is, the question we want to know is like, how long is the line when this bile acid gets back to the liver? Is the liver like really, really behind and the line is really, really long, or is the liver just cruising along and everything's going well with detoxification? So what we see here is that, again, she's off the chart high. So the test stops measuring at 26.5. She's over 26.5. So she could be 26.6 or she could be 500,000. We don't know. But what we do know is that the line is extremely long. So long that some of these bile acids are spilling over into the bloodstream and now being picked up in the urine. And we're only measuring bile acids, But bile acids are certainly not the only thing in line, as the liver is in charge of 500 different processes in the body. And it's sort of a grand central station where things go to be pulled apart, reassembled in other ways. The liver is doing a lot around toxins and things like that, and old hormones and those types of things. So there's a bunch of other things in line with bile acids, like toxins, like old hormones. And those things are also spilling over into the blood, we know by proxy. And then we get to our oxidative stress marker, which we use 8-OHDG to measure. 8-OHDG is a measure of damage to nucleic acid, which eventually becomes DNA. So this is a cumulative marker for about 90 days. So we can tell that over the past 90 days, and that's all we really know, we don't know what happened before that, her oxidative stress is really, really high, which means that there is cell damage sort of across all areas of function in the body. So oxidative stress doesn't just affect digestion or detoxification. It affects everything when cells are compromised. And her level of oxidative stress is really quite high. So we definitely want to check into her lifestyle for some answers around, like, are you getting extra oxidative load in certain places, like your personal care products, your environment, the air that you're breathing, the water that you're drinking? Does the food have pesticides? You know, that's the type of exploration we will go into as FDNs to try and identify where some of this overload of oxidative influences come from. Okay, so that is our metabolic wellness panel. Now we're going to move on to our mucosal barrier assessment. Reed and I, in the opening series of events, did some mucosal barrier education. So I don't want to go over all of that again, but I will say that the mucosal barrier, when we talk about the mucosal barrier, we're talking specifically about the small intestine. There are mucosal barriers in a lot of other places, but we're measuring this one specifically in the small intestine. And this is where we have the tight junctions in that layer of enterocytes that is going to be our guardian, that's going to keep out the bad things and let in the good things. And then the good things are going to go through our immune layer and into the bloodstream. But when the tight junctions are not tight, when they are open, when that mucosal barrier is damaged, then we get a lot of stuff that shouldn't get into the immune layer, should never make it through the mucosal barrier, gets into the immune layer, and now the immune layer has a huge job to do to clean that up. So we want to look first at zonulin, which is the chemical signature of open tight junctions. That is the chemical that the body makes to say, hey, just in this emergency situation, we need to open some tight junctions so we can flush out some garbage from the immune layer. And so zonulin says, all right, I'm going to open like these tight junctions and we're going to flush this thing out. But when the tight junctions are open, there is no guardrail for things only going out. So now those tight junctions are open to receive things that they shouldn't receive. And then more immune reaction happens, more zonulin has to be made, and then we get this process of too many tight junctions open at one time, otherwise known as leaky gut. So zonulin is the culprit there. And so we do see that her zonulin is elevated. It's over here in our fourth quintile, indicating that we have too many tight junctions open at one time. Now, the power of this test versus other leaky gut tests, because I think most of us can assume that we have some level of leaky gut going on. And so, you know, why do we actually run this test? Well, the reason we run this test is because we want to know not just is there a leaky gut going on, but what is the immune burden that has come from the fact that those tight junctions are open, that too many of them are open at one time. So we look at histamine, which is that immune reaction that's happening on the other side of the mucosal barrier. And for her histamine is really high. So we're getting this impression of like tight junctions open, bunch of junk flowing in, an immune system that's really stressed out, trying to capture those things and make sure that they don't move along to the bloodstream and affect the entire body. And then we have this other marker, DAO, which is diamine oxidase. And it is an enzyme whose job is to take histamine apart. So this is sort of the counterbalance, because histamine, while it is there for a reason, is pro-inflammatory. And it is sort of that inflammation that sequesters those things that we don't want to go to the bloodstream. But we don't want to hang out with a bunch of inflammation either. That's bad. So we have this sort of natural counterbalance of DAO to come in and take apart the histamine. So the question becomes, how well is DAO doing that job? So we see that the DAO itself is getting low, which means that there is damage on the to the mucosal barrier where DAO is produced. So we're getting this sort of impression of like tight junctions open, villi being damaged, crypts getting hyperplagic, and immune burden on the other side as a result. But we just want to check out the ratio to make sure that we're right. Is there enough histamine to DAO? And there is not. So we see this ratio way over in the red at 135. And that tells us that this is a pro-inflammatory environment in the gut. So we don't have enough anti-inflammatory input. We've got pro-inflammation, a lot of immune stress, and a lot of metabolic chaos going on in the gut, which then speaks directly back to that indican that we looked at on the first test. Why is protein not being digested properly? Well, because the environment of the gut is in total chaos. There's leaky gut, mucosal barrier damage, inflammation all over the place. The immune system's freaking out. So of course, digestion is going to be compromised as a result. So that is our metabolic wellness profile. I'm just going to look quickly here at MRT results, and then we'll go back and pick up stool pathogen testing.
Awesome.
Okay, great. So this is our Mediator release test, which is food sensitivities. So we use live blood for this test, where the lab sort of apportions the live blood into these various vials and then introduces a food antigen and then watches in real time as the white blood cells push out mediators against foods that they don't like. And then we can then see the volumetric change within that vial. And so it's not an IgG test where you have to eat the thing beforehand so that the blood has a memory of the thing that it doesn't like, and the blood is sort of dead at that time and you can't ask it questions about things that it doesn't remember because it's not alive. This is live blood where you can ask it any question that you want. And so we really like this particular test. So she's come up with a few food sensitivities here. Potassium nitrate, potatoes, sweet potatoes, cabbage, tomato, butternut squash, bell peppers, cow's milk, whey, cottage cheese, soybean, almond, lima bean, dill, black pepper, maple, orange, avocado, strawberry, barley, kamut, and wheat. So a lot of things that she might have thought were healthy for her turn out not to be. So then we can sort of take that immediate sort of layer of low-hanging fruit of stress and peel it off of her body. So that is a very exciting outcome for why we do food sensitivity testing. And I don't seem to have the GI map at my fingertips for some reason, but I can get it really quickly.
Problem. So we had some good questions in here, so I'll kind of reiterate for some people who are missing. So the first test was a salivary test. That's our stress and hormones profile. It was looking at cortisol and sex hormones. The second one is a dried urine test. That's the metabolic wellness profile from Fluids IQ. And then the third test that Elizabeth went over, that's the mucosal barrier assessment. That's the one with zonulin, histamine, DAO. That's a dry blood spot test. And then again from Fluids IQ. And then the food sensitivity test is the LEAP MRT, and that is from Oxford Biomedical. So now we're jumping into the stool test, which is the GI map from Diagnostic Solutions.
Awesome. Thank you, Brandy. Okay, so this is the GI map, as Brandy mentioned. This is our stool pathogen test. Now, for FDNs, we recognize that when you have an immune system that's not working well, when you have a mucosal barrier that's all ripped up, when you have inflammation all over the place, that is going to allow some bad guys to move in who shouldn't have moved in. But these guys are not the result of the problem in our methodology. They are the they are not the problem in our methodology. They are the result of the problem. They are the result of the metabolic chaos that's coming up everywhere else. However, they are costing money out of the vital reserve bank account. And so we want to deal with them in our effort to round up all the stressors and get them out of there. So we're going to start with our commensals. The commensals are showing that some of them are low, some of them are high, but that in general, they are stressed out and inflamed. So they're not happy. They're not functioning well. They're feeling super in competition with each other. They're feeling inflamed and very, very stressed. So as a result, we're seeing the opportunistic guys have really gotten a toehold in here and are able to kind of move in and do whatever they want because the commensals are out of sorts and confused and freaked out and stressed out. So we've got a lot of opportunistic bacteria showing up here. We've got some autoimmune and inflammatory triggers showing up here. And we've got a lot of fungi and yeast showing up here. We've got both Candida species and Candida albicans. So some of the digestive stuff that she was talking about on her metabolic chaos scorecard with the blood sugar swings, absolutely this yeast can be part of that. This dysbiosis can be part of that. And so we're getting a lot of really good clinical correlation here. With her H. pylori, this is a spiral-shaped bacteria that burrows down into the stomach lining and can pass through to the small intestine. It is there. It is under lab range, but because she doesn't have pristine gut health, she does have an inflammatory environment and some immune challenges. We are going to look at this like it is a stressor, and we would recommend self-treatment for this H. pylori, even though it is under lab range. So then we don't see any parasites or worms, which is great. And on her page 1, which these are sort of the baddies of the baddest, which we would consider pathogenic at any level. None of those are showing up, so that's great. Then we look at her intestinal health markers. So for her steatocrit, which is a measure of undigested fat, it showed up undetectable on this test. Now, as an FDN, I'm never going to be like, oh, that means she's digesting fat really well, like thumbs up, she's doing great. We would take this as what we call a non-clue. We use our functional testing to rule things in. We do not use them to rule things out. So we cannot rule out the possibility that there is chaos in her fat digesting ability. Maybe she didn't eat any fat when in the meal that this stool sample corresponds to. There could be a million reasons why it doesn't show up on this test. Then her elastase is a pancreatic enzyme, and it is low. So we know either the pancreas was not stimulated by strong stomach acid to make digestive enzymes, or the pancreas itself is compromised in making enzymes. But we do know that that is compromising digestion. Beta-glucuronidase is an enzyme that when it is overgrown can come and eat away the bonds that the liver has made between a toxin and a binder to get it out of the body. And so she is functionally high here in beta-glucuronidase. So this is adding to that liver congestion marker that we were seeing earlier. No occult blood. So that's good, but also it's a non-clue. We can't say like she's totally good for that. It's just a non-clue for us. Sig-A, we were measuring it in stool before we were measuring it in saliva, and we saw that it was low there. It's also low in stool. So again, we see this image of an immune system which is just being hit from all sides for too long, doesn't have any more money to spend, and is exhausted, not doing its job very well. Antigliadin, IgA is an IgA complex that is made specifically against the gliadin component of gluten. So if it were high, it would speak to gluten sensitivity. But again, we don't use these tests to rule things out. So people can be sensitive to gluten in a million different ways, not necessarily only through this gliadin component. So just because it didn't show up here or show up abundant enough to raise flags doesn't mean she isn't sensitive to gluten. She did come up sensitive to wheat on her MRT. So we're definitely going to be recommending that she go wheat-free. This eosinophil activation protein is just another sort of way to look at immune activity. And because her immune system is suppressed, I'm not surprised to see that the eosinophil activation protein is also low and in that normal range, because the immune system just is not functioning at top speed. And then calprotectin is this sort of marker of inflammation. And again, it's not showing up here, but we got plenty of other inflammatory markers on the other tests to know that that is a problem. And again, we're not going to rule it out. We don't rule things out, and especially not based on one marker when we're going to look at the whole environment. So that is her testing.
Awesome. And I've been answering questions here along the way. So I got some good ones for towards the end, but the one question we had is, are we going to go into what you're recommending? And that's what Elizabeth is going to go into now.
Yes. So test results are great, but what are we going to do about that? So this is the part of the process that we call our Dress for Health Success program. So that is D for diet, R for rest, E for exercise, S for stress reduction, and S for supplementation. So we believe, Brandy and I did a whole webinar on this. So we believe that all 5 pillars are important to healing, that you can't just supplement your way out of all of this metabolic chaos. You can't just diet your way out of all of this metabolic chaos. So it has to be all 5 pillars. That's really where you're putting the most amount of money back in the vital reserve bank account. Otherwise, you might not ever put enough money back in to see huge amounts of healing. So with diet, trying to get back to the lifestyle medical history form here, guys, and the Adobe is being mean to me and not closing properly. Okay, great. So she did this self-assessment of her own dress, and we're going to go back to that so that we can check this out. But Brandy, do you happen to remember what she was metabolic type wise?
I believe she was a slow oxidizer.
Slow oxidizer. Okay, great.
Yes.
So, okay, great. So her particular body, her particular genes want more of a carb focus and less of a protein and fat focus. So the first thing we're going to do is get that macronutrient ratio correct for her. So we're going to put her through a process of diet check record sheets where she's going to be self-reporting on how her meals make her feel an hour to an hour and a half after she eats them, so that we can really get that right to make sure that she's eating the diet that is appropriate for her. And we're going to take out all of the foods that were sensitive on her list. So all of those yellow foods that we saw on the MRT, those are gone. Now we're going to look at these imbalances in her lifestyle. She's eating a ton of processed foods. She's drinking tap water. She's following this low fat diet. She's on calorie restriction. She eats out a lot. She eats processed food. She eats fast food. She eats wheat and dairy. She drinks too much coffee. She drinks too much alcohol. She drinks too much soda. So there's a lot of work that we can do here on lifestyle to make sure that we're cleaning up that diet really, really well, getting rid of processed sugar, getting rid of dairy, at least for a little while until we see how it affects her, getting rid of wheat, getting the coffee consumption down, getting rid of alcohol, getting rid of the processed sugar, and trying to focus on whole foods that are not out of a package or have been through some kind of process. So just teaching her how to prioritize organic shopping and making meals at home so that we can really get the most bang for our buck out of the diet. Then with rest, we recommend 8 hours a night. I know that's crazy in today's world where everyone's like, you can sleep when you're dead and you only live once and FOMO and like all the things, right? The YOLOs and the FOMOs of it all that can sometimes make us feel like if we sleep, we're going to miss out. And so it is really important that we do sleep for 8 hours. And not only is it important that we sleep for 8 hours, but it's important that we sleep for the right 8 hours. So our recommendation is to go to sleep at 10 and wake up around 6. That this is really where you're getting the most bang for your buck. That those hours before midnight for your liver and for other body processes count as 2 hours. And so you're really, it's important that like sleeping 10 to 6 is not the same as sleeping midnight to 8. And that's why we make that recommendation. So she needs to go to bed earlier. She needs to consistently sleep for 8 hours. She needs to have better sleep hygiene practices so that she's preparing her body for sleep in a better way, so that she's winding down home activities for the 2 hours prior to going to bed. She's not running around like vacuuming and making lunch and doing laundry and all these things that we tend to do to check off our mental list, but that make our bodies think, oh, we're still up and active. We're still anticipating external input that we need to stay alert to. We still need cortisol. It's not time to look inward. It's not time to power down and think about what needs to be healed inside. We still need to be alert. And then we just immediately go to bed and we're like, I don't know why I can't sleep. So she needs to work on her sleep hygiene. She needs to take the electronics out of her bedroom. Maybe try turning the wireless router off in her home at night. She sleeps in a sleep number bed that has a motor in it, unfortunately. And so this motor is plugged in all night. And so it is emitting EMF even when she's not using that motor. And it's going into her body all night long, every night, while she's sleeping when her body is most vulnerable. And she doesn't really do well at sleeping in a cool room. She only gave herself a 2 for that. So lots of things that we can work on here in the rest category. For exercise, she's not exercising enough. So we need to like raise that exercise a little bit, but she's focusing on cardio. Like that is her primary focus. And she's in the exhaustive phase. So she cannot handle like 5 days of cardio. She cannot handle really intense HIIT. So she is a little too sedentary right now, but we need to sort of change up the exercise so that it matches her vital reserve and isn't taking more out of the bank account. So getting her activity level to sort of match her vital reserve will be the process that we go through with exercise. Then we want to go through her physical stressors. Like she's sitting too much during the day. She's drinking too much caffeine. She's overscheduled. These are things that we can work on. These mental emotional stressors, it's her responsibility to sort of do an inventory of her life and say like, hey, what can I do? How can I take responsibility for my mental and emotional health in better ways? And of course, we can't always move all of the big rocks in our mental emotional category immediately. But it is our responsibility to look fearlessly and honestly at our mental emotional situation and take responsibility for it. make a plan. And be like, okay, if I'm constantly worried about money, what am I going to do about that? If I'm in a relationship that isn't feeding me and is causing me a lot of stress, what am I going to do about that? So working with her on those types of things, or helping her refer out to someone who can help her if I feel like it's out of my scope. Then with the environmental stressors, we're going to do a really deep inventory of her home, her personal care products, what she's putting on and in her body, what she's storing her food in, what she's cooking on and in. All of those things matter in terms of this extra oxidative load that's coming in that we're seeing in our oxidative stress marker. So it's really important that we find these exogenous sources of oxidative influence and mitigate them as much as possible. And then with supplementation, we would definitely be adding in some adrenal support to make sure that her adrenals are not overworking and, incredibly tired, and that they feel supported and that they're sort of bathed in a supportive nutritional matrix. We would be adding in some DHEA and pregnenolone to sort of salt the shaft really high on the hormone chain, so that hoping that comes down to be more anabolic potential, more estrogen, more progesterone, more testosterone, and that generally speaking, that's going to jumpstart that hormone process, which is a little bit shut down right now. And then we would put in some immune support to start raise the function of the immune system and help the excuse me, the immune system meet those challenges. Then for her total bile acid marker with the liver congestion, we would want to put in some sort of supplementation that would help bile flow more easily and raise the detoxification function of the liver in both phase 1 and phase 2, so that we are able to move through this backlog while raising vital reserve in the body, so that it feels like there's more money to spend on detoxification. If the body is sort of looking at detoxification and saying, like, I have 5 cents in the bank and detoxification costs $500, then I'm going to just store it. I'm going to put it where I can put it. I'm going to put it in fat and tissue and the brain and bone, and not move it, because that's cheaper. So all the while, we want to put vital reserve money into the bank account so that all of these functions can be better funded, while we are putting in supplementation to support those functions. And then for the mucosal barrier assessment, we definitely want to put in some products that will help that mucosal lining rebuild itself, that will encourage the gut to be calm and less inflammatory. And we'll put in some for probiotics to help the commensal balance be better, put in some DAO to help sort of bring down that histamine burden, while we're figuring out how to calm the gut down and rebuild the lining and get the leaky gut under control. And then we will do some biofilm disrupting and some pathogen eradication in the gut to get rid of all of those opportunistic guys that we found and take that layer of stress off while we are rebuilding the gut. And then we can introduce the sensitive foods back in one at a time around the 90-day mark to see how much gut healing we've accomplished. So those are the basic recommendations that we made. And we checked in on her 9 months later, and she was pregnant.
Yay.
So
Awesome.
It was a successful, successful case.
Awesome. I'm going to just put this up while we answer questions. How much time do you have for questions, just so we can make sure we get as many questions answered as possible, Elizabeth?
About 15 minutes.
Okay. So I think we can probably go through these pretty quickly. I was trying to answer them while they were coming up, but I think it's a good question for everybody to hear. So when we run labs for female clients, how do we account for those that are on oral contraceptives or BHRT?
So we're going to know that from their intake documents and from all the conversations that we've had with them. And so we're going to expect to see some hormone results that are aided, that we're not seeing sort of the body's natural baseline. And that's okay, because we recognize that that if there's prescriptions in play, we don't want to go behind the doctor's back and do something different. We are in a partnership with the doctor, and I'm not going to go in there and mess with what the doctor is doing. That's not within my scope of practice. What the doctor is doing sort of always trumps my recommendations. So I'm first of all going to expect that the baseline is going to be moved because there is this exogenous influence of hormones. But I still want to see how they are in balance with each other and what those ratios are doing, and how she is feeling in relationship to the hormone results. So, if we're seeing like really high estrogen and she's anxious and nervous and irritable and all the things, then we're going to say, okay, well, maybe talk to your doctor about bringing this dosage down or seeing about another oral contraceptive that has less estrogen in it, because we're making good clinical correlation there.
Great. I can answer this one. Is cortisol dependent upon food eaten, etc.? Could this be different every day? Yes. So if you're eating a food that your body is sensitive to, that is creating a stress response, and that can definitely affect your cortisol. But the same is also true if you're eating a food that is spiking your blood sugar, that is also a stress response. So we definitely need to take that into account when we're looking at the cortisol and make those correlations that Elizabeth talked about. Okay, let's see. Okay, this is a good question. How do we do saliva testing during the luteal phase for women who don't experience a regular cycle?
So if the cycle is not regular, it's always a little bit of a guessing game. So we recommend that they go to the drugstore and pick up the ovulation strips and just sort of do it every day until you identify that ovulation has started. And at that point, you would do the test 5 to 7 days later. But that's assuming a 30-day cycle, or a 28-day cycle. But if you don't have that, if the cycle is irregular all over the place, like a perimenopausal situation, there's just naturally going to be some ambiguity in there about whether or not we nailed it. And so you would just sort of keep track of your period before the test and your period after the test, know which date we tested on within that window, and then we can make some guesses as to what phase someone was in if the cycle is irregular when they took the test.
Yes. And then there was another question earlier on, why don't we look at thyroid markers?
Yeah, so our methodology doesn't look at every single healing opportunity that's possible to look at in the body. And that's simply because we don't have $10,000 to spend on lab testing every time, right? So we're trying to be good stewards of the client's money of like, which markers do we really need that talk to each other, that tell the story, that make the difference? And what we tend to feel about thyroid is that the thyroid is sort of the gas pedal of the body. So if it's looking at the gas tank and seeing that there's not enough gas, like the vital reserve gas tank is low, then it's automatically going to ease off the accelerator pedal. And then you would get something like hypothyroid symptoms or that sort of cluster of symptoms show up. But it is our contention that that's not just the thyroid being like, I need a me day, I'm just gonna sit down and take it easy, that is actually a very intelligent response to the terrain. And so if we can fix the terrain, then we can make an environment where the thyroid feels safe enough to start functioning normally again, without ever having to really identify that the thyroid was a problem upstream.
Yeah. You said, how well is DA doing its job? DAO was explained to break down histamines. Can you correlate and explain this again? If we can't break down histamines, what does that mean?
So what that means if histamine is not being broken down effectively is that there's going to be an environment of inflammation that's happening in whatever place is driving the histamine. So we're particularly on this test measuring the gut, but histamine can be everywhere in the body, not just in the gut. So that gives us a look at the inflammatory terrain of that particular space of the body. So like histamine is inflammatory, DAO is anti-inflammatory. Where is the balance there? So if there's a lot less DAO and a lot more histamine, we know we're dealing with inflammation that just doesn't have a chance of rectifying itself and is just sort of in this constant loop.
Great. I'll answer this question. What if you can't get DHEA or pregnenolone? Would you refer for BHRT or try other supplements? So I, as a Canadian, cannot use the hormones. And I did actually work quite a bit with the demographic of people who were dealing with infertility, and I very rarely used hormones with those people. And the reason for that is that when you actually start to address the hidden stressors that we've talked about, the hormones tend to bounce back. Now, that does not mean that I didn't help them with other supplements and herbs. They kind of support the hormones. But more times than not, when we started dealing with the stressors in the life, the personal care products, dealing with the gut, dealing with blood sugar, going to bed, all of those stressors, as they improved, the body got the signal that it was safe to produce hormones again. And again, we're making sure they're eating those building blocks. Are they having enough fats? Do they have the building blocks to make hormones? So you don't have to have hormones to do this. Was there a couple cases where they really did need it? Yes. And then I would connect them with somebody who prescribes that. And the easiest way to do that is to check with the compounding pharmacy locally, especially in Canada. Ask them which practitioners refer people for bioidentical hormones, and then you can try to connect with them. So you don't have to get access to hormones. So I wanted to answer that. Okay, what if anti-gliadin is elevated on the GI map as well as on the blood test, but no other markers for gluten sensitivity? What does that mean?
Well, it's hard to know what that means in isolation as just one marker without looking at all other markers and the state of the gut as a whole. FDN is not a fan of looking at just one marker on one test and making any definitive statements about that. But that being said, if there is any indication of gluten sensitivity, then we take that as gluten sensitivity. And whether there are indications of gluten sensitivity or not on the testing that we do, we still recommend that people remove gluten because there are 8,000 ways to be sensitive to gluten. And we don't test for all of those.
Mm-hmm. How long should one wait before reintroducing red foods on a food sensitivity test?
At least 90 days is our recommendation because removing the food is one thing. That is removing an inflammatory trigger, but you still have to heal the damage that is done to the gut in order to resolve those food sensitivities, and you want to give that the best possible chance. So if you are doing gut rebuilding along with removal of food, then 90 days is the minimum, yeah.
I can answer this one. Is metabolic typing part of the FDN course where the students get to take the test on themselves as part of the course? If not, do students learn in detail about this test? So yes, metabolic typing, we do teach on it in the course. We are not the official trainers of metabolic typing because that is a proprietary test online assessment by Bill Wolcott. But we do teach about it. You do get to run it on yourself as part of the course. And we do talk about how it is leveraged and used. And for those of you who want to learn more about it, we actually have updated some information on it at mtdiet.com. So you can go to mtdiet.com and just read up about what the metabolic typing philosophy is. And do you have time for one more question? I think this is a good question.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. When presenting the protocol to the client, do you offer these recommendations in phases to avoid overwhelm to the client?
We sure do. So what we generally, the structure of the program is generally that you will meet with the client every week or 2 weeks, depending on the level of coaching that they desire. I tend to like 2 weeks because I feel like it's really hard to implement a change and then see if the change is working in 1 week. So I generally like to give them a week to implement the change and then a week to see how that change is working, and then we meet. So I tend to drip out the DRESS in those 2 week increments, to sort of be like, okay, how are we doing with the last portions of that? Great. Now add this and add this. And then, okay, then for rest, you want to add this and you want to add this. And then we can phase in the next phase of supplementation and based on where we are. So yes, we do operate in phases.
Yeah, and that answers a bit of a question that was on here about coaching. So we are working with our clients all along the way. We're not just giving it to them and then letting them go. Like, we're coaching them throughout the process.
Yes.
So awesome. Well, I want to respect your time. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you all for being here. As you saw on the screen, our next event is all about supplements. So join us on Monday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific. There'll be Elizabeth Reed and some other mentors on the call. We're going to talk about our philosophy when it comes to supplements. So bring all of your questions there. And again, thank you so much for joining us. You can watch the replays on our YouTube channel. Brenda has been posting that in the chat here several times. So thank you again and have a fantastic Wednesday.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.